There's one fly that fish will eat that completely changes how you approach and fish a river. Stoneflies are one of the most important bugs in a fish's diet, and even though the nymphs are available year-round, it's the big hatches in early summer that really get the trout going. We're talking aggressive, angry takes on big dry flies. Basically, the best of the best in fly fishing. This week on Untangled, you'll learn all the key info about stoneflies, when and where they hatch, how to fish them, and the go-to patterns we use here at VFC. You'll be ready to make the most of this incredible hatch. This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Co. Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is Untangled, and I am your host, Spencer Durant. Sometimes I think we get all caught up in the dainty mayfly hatches and the tiny midges and the smaller caddis flies, and we overlook, or if you're a beginner, you may not even know about just how incredible a big, wonderful stonefly hatch can be, because you've got these giant bugs. They look like dinosaurs, and they're just plopping into the river, and they're big enough that really every nice sized fish in the area is going to be looking up to eat off of the top. And that's honestly what I imagine heaven to be like, just a bunch of big trout willing to take a dry fly. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here, because before we get into the nuts and bolts of a big stonefly hatch and how to fish them, we really need to identify what a stonefly is, what they look like, when and where they hatch, and why the fish eat them. Especially if you are new to fly fishing and you don't know what a stonefly is yet, or you've heard the phrase, but you aren't really able to connect it to an actual bug. Well, that's what we're going to do today so that you can take advantage of this incredible opportunity that stonefly hatches present. So, stoneflies, they are one of the major species of aquatic insects that are available to fish in a river system. And this is not just a trout bug. Bass will definitely eat stoneflies too. The late, great Dave Whitlock, who was one of the big pioneers of fishing bass on a fly rod, talked about fishing stonefly nymphs consistently for him. If you go back and read any of his older articles, especially in Fly Fisherman magazine, talks about it all the time. They'll eat stonefly nymphs. And then just in case you're not aware, aquatic insects are the bugs that hatch and live and spend most of their life in or around the water. That's where they go back to lay their eggs. It's where they spend, honestly, they spend more of their life underwater than they do out of the water. And these aquatic bugs form the bulk of the diet for fish that live in rivers and then lakes as well, all over the world. So stoneflies stand out from the rest of the aquatic insects because, for the most part, they're freaking huge. They're like me after I'm done at all you can eat wings, where I really gotta undo the belt. I gotta have Alex help me waddle back out to the truck so I can get home safe, because it's not pretty. Sometimes you take me to all you can eat wings. But anyways, stoneflies are that big. They really are. They're just big. About an inch long is kind of an average for some of them, but then the biggest species, the salmon fly, gets up to over 3 inches, which you think about a bug, a 3-inch bug. That's a lot of fun to fish, something that big. You can see them real easy, which is really nice, but then the fish get really aggressive with the takes as well. But especially when you compare a stonefly to midges, mayflies, or caddis, those are typically pretty small bugs, and then you've got these big old stoneflies that just come out. They're so much stinking fun. The stonefly life cycle is also a little bit simpler than midges, mayflies, and caddis, because like every other aquatic insect, stoneflies start their life out as an egg on the bottom of the river, and then once they hatch, they enter their larval or nymph stage. So this is the life cycle stage that we imitate with our nymphs. It's when they're out of the egg. They're not the adult yet. They don't have wings, but they are cruising around on the bottom doing whatever it is bugs do, getting ready to become an adult. And this is what our nymph represents. And they can actually live in this larval or nymph stage for like up to 2 years. Some of the species will. They'll spend all of this time, they're eating, they're growing, and they're getting ready to become a full-blown adult, to get out there and take on the world and grab it by the tail and put it in their pockets so they don't end up living in a van down by the river, although they will end up living by the river because they're aquatic insects and that's where they live. So, yeah, maybe they're really not doing too well for themselves. Oh, well, once they're ready to hatch, the stoneflies will crawl out of the river and they'll attach themselves to any kind of sturdy structure they can find. Typically, that's going to be the nearest rock, tree branch, or anything else they can crawl onto and be secure and safe from the river sweeping them downstream. Because then what they're going to do is they're going to molt into the adult. And this is a little bit different than what the mayflies or what the caddis do, because while mayflies do need to shed their nymphal shuck, usually it just falls back into the water. You don't really see it. But stoneflies, they end up molting this exoskeleton. It looks kind of creepy. It looks almost like a ghost of a stonefly got frozen in place because they literally just, they molt and then crawl out of their exoskeleton and it just stays there. And I'm sure I'm probably using exoskeleton incorrectly for the biologists and entomologists out there. I do deeply apologize, but I'm trying to give a good visual of what that looks like for folks out there. So anyways, at this point, once they shed that nymphal shuck, they leave it behind, and you'll see these. They'll be attached to rocks and branches. Again, any sturdy structure near the river, you'll find them. They'll fly away. They'll find a mate so that they can go back to the river, lay their eggs, and die, complete that life cycle. So if you get to the river and you see these shucks, you see these, it looks like dead stoneflies, but there's nothing inside of them. It's a really good clue to go ahead and start fishing stoneflies if you see them at the right time of year. From about May through early August is usually your peak stonefly activity. If you're out there and you see some of these stonefly husks in like October, I probably wouldn't get too excited because chances are they're not really active. Those husks can stick around for quite a while. But it's one of the most interesting things about the stoneflies is you can actually see direct evidence of when they've turned into the adults. It's really kind of cool to watch. Something else which is really unique about stoneflies is that the adult and the nymphs look very similar. They almost look exactly the same. It's really kind of trippy. Your mayfly nymphs don't look anything like the adult mayfly at all. They don't have the big wings. They're usually a little shorter and stubbier, and then they turn into this graceful, beautiful looking adult. Stoneflies, they look almost exactly the same from their nymph to their adult, other than the wings, of course. And what that's going to look like is they both have these heavily segmented bodies that do taper down to a pair of shorter, stubbier tails, and they will always have two forked tails with stoneflies. And then they do have these longer antennae sticking out of the front of them as well. Your mayfly and stonefly nymphs can look pretty similar, but your stonefly nymphs are generally a little bit larger, and then the tails on a mayfly nymph are a little bit longer and finer. Even at the nymph stage, they are just a little bit more delicate sometimes. And then again, they'll have these long antennae, the stoneflies will. And then as the adult, they've got these big wings that are the length of their entire body, but they're folded up and they lay flat on their backs. They're not like a caddis that kind of makes the wing like a tent, and they're not like the mayfly where the wings stick straight up like sailboat. They just lay flat across the top of their back. Kind of similar to how some of the grasshopper wings fold up, but not, they're on top of the back and not on the sides. So that's a little bit about the bug itself. Well, where do you find them? Well, where do you look for a stonefly? Well, they require highly oxygenated, cool, and clean water. They're very picky about the habitat that they want to live in. They really thrive in the riffles and the pocket water that you find on freestone rivers. Your bigger, slower, deep spring creeks really aren't ideal habitat. A lot of tailwaters, that's the river that comes out from beneath the dam, they're not great stonefly habitat either because they usually don't have that very fast, very riffly water that stoneflies love. And a good example of this is one of my favorite rivers that I love to fish back home is a big tailwater, and the first, I think, 13 miles of it go through this really steep canyon. and there's a lot of turbulent water. There's some nice pools, but there's a lot of really turbulent water, a lot of pocket water, a lot of that highly oxygenated water that stoneflies love. But then that once it gets out of the canyon, that river mellows out, and it's a bunch of pools, really deep, slow moving stuff, and you get this beautiful stonefly hatch up in the canyon. But then in the lower valley section of that river, nothing. No stoneflies at all down there, because they really are so picky about where they live and what type of water they're living in. So that's just that's the habitat that you want to look for these stoneflies in. And stoneflies are definitely more prevalent in the West, especially the giant salmon flies and the golden stoneflies. We'll get into those in just a minute. But there are stoneflies scattered throughout the rest of the country as well. They're not only out west, but this is where the biggest and the thickest hatches tend to be, is out here in the Rockies, where we've got a lot of these big freestones with a lot of pocket water, a lot of the habitat that these stoneflies really love. And then a lot of what you're going to see outside of the West are going to be like your smaller winter stoneflies and then the yellow Sally. It's pretty common to see elsewhere. The small winter stonefly, or the winter black stonefly, you might hear them called that. They're the same bug. We just have a lot of different names for them. They're going to hatch during winter, as their name implies, usually a little bit later in the winter and very early spring. And they're not too big. They're really small for a stonefly. Sizes like 16 and 14 are very common, but they are a big meal during the winter, because a lot of the bugs during winter are midges. So that's really the only aquatic insect that's moving around too much. So when you get this little stonefly comes off, that's going to get the attention of some of the trout. So it can be a pretty interesting day of fishing if you get into a good small black stonefly hatch. Now your yellow Sallies, they'll come off. This is your next species of stonefly, your yellow Sallies. They'll come off starting around in May, and they'll go all the way through August in some places. But the peak of yellow Sally fishing, in my experience, has always been during June. Now, these are a little bit bigger of a stonefly. They're usually sizes 14s, and then you'll see some 12s in a lot of places. And they often hatch, again, at the same time as your caddis flies. So you've got your big caddis hatches in June. They've also got your big yellow Sally hatches coming off. And the fish can actually get really selective on whether they're eating the yellow Sally or the caddis. And that can be incredibly frustrating until you figure it out. And I'm speaking from experience. I don't know how many times I've gone out when the Sallies and the caddis are coming off and really just not been able to suss out what they're eating. It can be, and it can change from fish to fish. One fish might be on the caddis, one fish might be on the yellow Sallies. So it does pay to use your watch and wait skills that we've discussed, where you sit and you observe and watch what the fish are eating before you start casting to them. And by the way, if you want to see all this information that we're talking about here, the bugs, how we fish them, what they all look like, we've actually got an entire episode dedicated to stoneflies in our fly selection masterclass. It's free. It's here on YouTube. I'll throw a link to that in the show notes, or a QR code here on the screen if you are watching the video podcast as well. You can go check some of this out and actually see it. Now, the rock stars of the stonefly family, we talked our winter stones, our yellow Sallies. They're the opening act. They're the I'm blanking on some good bands here. They're the Ben Folds to your Bare Naked Ladies. They're the what's a band who would open for Pearl Jam? I almost said Nirvana for Pearl Jam, but that's not right. You get the point. They're the opening act. They're not the headliners. The headliners are going to be your salmon flies. When you talk about fishing stoneflies, I think this is what a lot of people picture, is this giant salmon fly hatch that happens, because these things are huge. They're not only huge, but they're very abundant in a lot of places. They get up to like 3 inches long, and they've got this bright orange belly. But other than that, they look just like every other stonefly, just on a massive scale. And these are the big ones that really get folks in the Rockies just jazzed. Usually from May through early July, is when you're going to see them come off. And then if you get into the peak of the salmon fly hatch, it can just be absolutely incredible. The kind of fishing that you write stories about, that you make a podcast about, it really will be an experience you never forget. And just to give you a taste of what that's like, a few years ago, I was fishing here in Utah where I lived at the time, and I got down this little river. It was early June, I think maybe the first week of June, and I get down to the river, long hike to get down to it. And the first thing I see is there's this little sign next to the river, and I can't remember what's on the sign, but on the sign post, it was just covered in these stonefly husks, like I mentioned earlier. So I got really excited. I threw on a chubby Chernobyl and then some kind of stonefly nymph, and I just went to work, and I caught, I don't know how many fish. They were blowing up my dry fly all day long, to the point where those chubby Chernobyls, they're foam bug, they're fairly durable. I went through like 2 or 3 of them because the fish just chewed them to bits. They were aggressively eating them so much. And again, I don't know how many fish I caught that day. I kind of lost count. They were all pretty decent size, especially for that stream. I was pretty surprised. But that's not atypical of what you can expect when the salmon flies are on and when they're actually moving and active and the fish are keyed in on them. They really will just go that nuts for them because it's a very big food item. Stoneflies are not great flyers or swimmers, so when they get stuck on the water, they're a really easy target. So easy food, and it's a big ticket meal item. Yeah, the fish are going to be all over that like me on a buffet. We're going to go for that 11 times out of 10. We're going to do it that much. So that's what your salmon fly hatch can be like. And you hear a lot about it on like the Henry's Fork, the Madison, that area up there, southwest Montana, northwest Idaho. No, northeast Idaho. I can talk. I know directions. Come on. That's really kind of the epicenter, but there's a lot of other great salmon fly hatches all throughout the West. You just got to put in a little bit of legwork to find them, because folks tend to be a little tight-lipped about the good ones that aren't crowded yet, because you can have that kind of fishing. And if you can have that fishing, be by yourself, there are a few things better in this world than that. But if you miss a salmon fly hatch, don't worry, because there's another stonefly that comes off. The golden stones are a little bit smaller than your salmon flies, but they're still pretty big. They're still in that 1 to, 2-ish inch range. But they offer a little bit more consistent fishing in my experience. They come off a little bit more consistently. They'll hatch from June through early August. Again, although that time frame can differ just a little bit depending on where you're fishing exactly out here. Golden stones are also found back east, so they're not just a western bug. But something that's really interesting that I found in my research, I didn't know this. The golden stones out east tend to hatch at night. That's just the species of them out there hatches at night. But in the Rockies, they hatch during the day. So it makes them more of an easily targetable hatch out here in the Rockies. And then again, stoneflies as a rule are concentrated in the Rockies. So you're going to have fast, furious hatches and fishing out here more so than you will elsewhere. But there are enough streams that have them elsewhere in the country, not just out east. I just use that as the example. But there's enough of them elsewhere that you can make trips to fish stoneflies without having to come out to the West. There's plenty of other opportunities. You'll have to do a little bit of legwork to find them, maybe locally to you, but there's opportunities to find and fish them. Now, speaking of fishing them, this is where things get really awesome, because stoneflies suck at flying. They really are not good flyers. They got these giant eggs, but they just kind of bumble around like they had a little too much to drink last night, and they're just not good at flying. So when they come back to the water to lay their eggs, they often end up falling in the water. A strong gust of wind can push them down in the water. They're just a clumsy bug for being this big. So what this means for you and why this is good is that you really want to slap your stoneflies on the water. There's none of this dainty mayfly landing like a butterfly with sore feet crap. No, you want your stoneflies to hit with some authority. You want to let the fish know they're there. Now, Obviously, you don't want to throw it like a rock hitting the water. That's not going to help anybody out. This is going to scare the fish. It's a little overkill. But you want to imitate what the real stoneflies look like when they hit the water, which is generally with a little bit of ruckus. Remember, your job is to put a fly in front of a fish and make it look real. Part of the make it look real part of the stoneflies is they land with a little bit of a ruckus. So don't be afraid to be a little splashy with them. And then this is also great for beginners because your cast doesn't have to be perfect. You still need a good presentation. You've got to put them where they should be, but you don't have to worry about an exactly perfect cast because even if those flies are hitting the water a little hard, the fish will still come up and eat them. Now, when the adults are hatching, I really tend to just fish a single dry fly at that point. That's just preference. I don't do it because it's the right way or the better way. That's just how I like to fish. But there's absolutely no reason to not go with a dry dropper rig throughout the entirety of the stonefly hatch because the nymphs are going to be active, the dries are going to be active, and the fish will pretty readily take both. I don't recall ever fishing a stonefly hatch and having a fish turn its nose up at my stonefly nymphs. So I wouldn't hesitate to fish that. But if you get to the river and you see a bunch of husks everywhere, but you don't see any fish rising, you don't see any of those bugs on the water, they probably haven't come back to the river to lay their eggs yet. So at that point, definitely fish a nymph. Dry dropper works great too, but make sure you've got a stonefly nymph on there because the fish might not be looking straight up for the big bugs yet, but those nymphs are probably pretty active in that scenario. Now, what do you use to fish with them? We talked a little bit about how, but what are the patterns? What are our go-to flies? Well, glad you asked. Our go-to patterns, I keep it pretty simple, all right? We have 3 chubby Chernobyl patterns that we use here at VFC. We've got your regular old chubby Chernobyl, we've got a chubby salmon fly, and then the chubby golden stone. These are all the same shape, but we just change the colors to better match exactly what's going on out there. So our chubby salmon fly is black and orange. Our golden stone has a lot of natural browns and golden yellows to it. And then our chubby Chernobyl is just our standard chubby colors as well. But we like these in sizes 8 to 10. And any of these are a great attractor dry fly that imitates your stoneflies. And then they also pull double duty as imitating grasshoppers. So you can use them for both. I fish these all the time during summer. And when I say all the time, I mean all the time. It's rare to find me without one of these on, unless I'm up in the high country. Then I've got my elk hair caddis on. We talked about caddis a couple of weeks ago. It's either a caddis that's on or a big chubby that's on as my top fly during the summer. That's really, they're so good. They're so dependable. It's really what I use a lot of the time. Another good dry fly option is going to be your orange stimulator. I like these in sizes 8 to 10. The orange stimmy is really great to imitate salmon flies. It works well for a golden stone too. You can get a yellow stimmy instead of an orange one, and that'll imitate that golden stone just fine. The stimulators float forever. They're very buoyant, but they're an absolute pain to tie. And they're not nearly as durable as foam. So they just have a little bit more of a natural, I wouldn't say realistic, but since they're not foam bugs, I think they've got a little bit more of a natural look to them. So if the fish are being picky for whatever reason, you can try throwing one of these instead. Another one that I've always got in the box is going to be the Yellow Sally. I've got this in a size 14. It is the go-to for the Yellow Sally hatch. Obviously, if you've got them in your area, if you have Yellow Sallies in your area, throw a couple of these in the box. You will not be disappointed with that. As far as my nymphs go, I've got a big old Pat's rubber legs, sizes 10 to 12. This is my go-to stonefly nymph because they're super easy to tie. They sink like a rock, and they almost perfectly imitate every stonefly nymph in the river. So what's not to love about that? It really is just a great little fly. You can tie them in different sizes, but I like 10 to 12. But if you need some more variety in your stonefly nymph arsenal, a 20-incher stone in a size 10 is a great option. It's a little bit more of a realistic stonefly imitation. They sink a little bit quicker than a Pat's because they're more streamlined. So if you are fishing faster water or deeper water, these can be a great option as well. Again, just a little bit more of a realistic one. And it's nice, as great as it would be to be able to fish with like 5 flies all the time, you do need variety sometimes. And that's why we'll also have the pheasant tail or the hare's ear in a size 10. That's my last go-to nymph. They're actually great stonefly nymph imitations. When you tie them that big, they look like a stonefly, and they're both really easy to tie, especially like a pheasant tail in a size 10. That's a piece of cake compared to trying to get that stupid pheasant tail stuff to work on a size 18 hook. They can be really great in this size. So that wraps up our little crash course here on stoneflies. So if you've got any questions about stoneflies, anything else you'd like to learn or know, drop it in the comments. Let me know. I'll see what I can do to help you out. But we're going to go ahead and move on to the Q&A section of this week's show.
Anglers are always asking, what bugs are hatching right now? And that's why we put together a year-round hatch chart. It outlines all the major bug hatches so you always know what fly to tie on, no matter where you're fishing or what time of the year. So if you want to level up your skills and start catching more fish, click or tap the link in the show notes to get this free hatch chart. All right, back to the show.
Every week here at Untangled, we spend half the show directly answering questions from listeners and viewers just like yourself. So if you've got a fly fishing question that you would like answered, you can go ahead and send that in. There's a link in the show notes, or there's a QR code here on the screen for those watching the video podcast. And keep those questions coming, folks, because we use them either in this section or they become the basis for the open of the show as well. So we will use your questions. Just make sure you keep on sending them in. And our first one comes to us this week from Connor from Pennsylvania, writes in and says, "Hey, Spencer, I have gotten really into fly fishing throughout the course of the last year thanks to the help from your guys' video and podcast. I enjoy listening to the podcast at work and in the car and then watching the videos in my free time. The high attention to detail and vast amounts of information that you guys have has been great. I recently heard that I'll have the opportunity to travel to California for a work trip and we'll be able to get out on the water out there. Do you have any recommendations for different techniques and patterns for fishing the backcountry / mountain streams of Cali, specifically in the Sierra Nevada mountains? Thanks, guys. Love what you guys are doing for the fishing community. P.S. I just bought a fly flinger combo and I am very eager for it to arrive." Connor, this is all you got to do. Put a fly in front of a fish, make it look real. That's it. All right, next question. No, I'm kidding. Thanks for the kind words, Connor. Congrats on the fly flinger. I hope it treats you well. Let us know how you like it. We get questions like this fairly frequently. Folks are going somewhere they haven't been. They want some tips and some advice. I am kind of flattered that folks think I've fished that many different places. I've fished in the Rockies and Alaska and a tiny bit back east. So I don't have near as... I've got a lot of years, but I don't have the geographical experience some other folks do. But anyways, this is a question that, again, we get stuff like this very frequently, so I wanted to address it. So I appreciate you writing in, Connor. When you head out to a brand new area that you've never fished before, there's usually going to be some apprehension about how the fishing is going to be. Okay, you're worried. Do you have the right flies? Are you going to be able to locate the fish? Are there even fish where you're headed? That's all run through my mind before, too. I worry about that stuff. And when I say worry, I used to worry about this so much that traveling started to feel not enjoyable because I was so concerned about, do I have the right flies? Are the fish going to be there? Is this the best time to do it? Is it even worth going? Where do we go? And is it public? Is it private? How are we going to get there? Do we need a guide? I would just worry so much that it felt like a second job. I would spend weeks tying flies, getting ready to go. I'd call fly shops. I'd research online. I'd lie still, beg and cheat for places to go fish. Okay, maybe not the last part. But then when I got to the rivers, and this happened time and time again, I get to the rivers, they really wouldn't feel all that different from what I'd left at home, and it would really throw me for a loop. And that's honestly been my experience because, especially if you're fishing for trout, there's very little difference in technique and patterns from one locale to the next. And I'll give you an example of what this looks like. Last summer, I was up in Alaska, and my buddy Glander and I, we went to the stream. It's real deep in the interior, and it's renowned for being one of the best grayling fisheries on the planet. I've caught multiple 20-inch grayling out of here, sometimes on the same trip, and that's a trophy-sized grayling. I'm not saying this to brag. That's how amazing this river is it's just full of the big ones. It's a pain in the butt to get to, but it's full of beautiful fish. And it's Alaska. It's exotic. It's a far-flung place. We have dreams of going there. And grayling are a little bit different than trout, even though they're kind of cousins. They act and feed very similarly to each other. I'm thousands of miles from home. I know I'm going to get into these wonderful fish. But within like an hour of getting there, and it does feel different. You're in the tundra. The landscape's different. So it does feel different. But within like an hour of getting to this river, this really big mayfly hatch comes off. The fish start feeding heavy in the riffles. So I threw on a parachute at them and fished for them like I was back home in Wyoming. And other than the fact that I was catching really big grayling, it didn't feel like I was in this faraway place. It felt very familiar. It felt very comforting. Even when on that same trip, we also spent a few days in a more rainforesty area of Alaska looking for some big rainbow trout. And even then, it felt very similar to home. Once I got onto the water, the rainforest to get there did not feel anything like Wyoming, but the actual fishing when we got into the river felt very similar to what I've got at home. Riffles, runs, pools, you're looking for the places where the fish are going to hang out. You're drifting your flies through it. It's all very familiar. So the point of this is that for a lot of trout fishing and grayling, we lump them in there too, there's very little in the way of special techniques or patterns that you need to be successful everywhere. The stuff we teach here at VFC, this is going to work for you no matter where you're fishing. Okay. There are always going to be local twists and flavors of bugs, and some fish in some rivers will have a reputation for feeding a certain way or at certain times of the day, but that's the exception. That's not the rule, because part of the fun of traveling to fish anyways is discovering all of this on your own. And when I finally quit worrying so much about whether I had the right bugs or the right tactics and I just went fishing, that's when I really started to enjoy the travel immensely. I just let everything else go and I just focused on the fishing. And I'm not saying, Connor, that you're doing anything wrong. Please don't take it that way. I'm just trying to tell you that, especially you're from Pennsylvania, you've got some great fly fishing out there. You've got some very educated trout that you're fishing to out in Pennsylvania as well. Especially coming from Pennsylvania, you're going to be just fine. You're going to be in great shape. If you really want to cover your bases for any hatches that might be different, because that's really what's going to be different, is not the bugs, but just the timing of when they come off and the sizes. That's what really is going to be different from what you're used to fishing. You could definitely call a fly shop or two in the area, recommend or see what they recommend that you've got on hand. But again, fish are fish. So no matter where you're fishing for them, you'll probably be a little surprised at how much of the skills you've learned back east easily translate to the Sierra Nevada. So hopefully that answers your question. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Jason from Idaho has our next question. Writes in and says, what are your personal motivations? I'm assuming the biggest market for purchasing new stuff is new fly fishers. Is this where your heart is? Helping new people get started? This seems like a philosophical conundrum. More people fishing equals less fish for you, more crowded rivers, etc. I can tell you that I'm starting to fish with my kids, and I'm very grateful to you guys. I think your channel, podcast, and other content is the best and easiest for accessing relevant information. Then again, I'm not that smart. Another question. How do you select a fishing guide who represents a good value? I'm not a millionaire, so I have a hard time paying $5,000 for a 4-night trip, but having someone give me a few pointers is something I'd gladly pay for. Jason, interesting questions. Thank you. First off, So I taught high school for 2 years, and I taught middle school for 1, and I went to college to become an English teacher. So the teaching aspect of what we do here at VFC is definitely something that's part of who I am. I never thought I would be a teacher, but then when I started doing it, I realized how much I enjoy it, and there's a good amount of fulfillment that comes from teaching. I really do enjoy helping and teaching folks with skills that can be kind of difficult to learn. And fly fishing is one of them, just because there's so much information that it can be difficult to synthesize it and understand what you need to know and what you don't need to know. But as far as like the rivers being crowded and worrying about that, like for me, fishing really isn't about the fish. And that there's highbrow people that philosophize about fly fishing as this path to enlightenment and as a vehicle for understanding the natural world, and fly fishing is just really an allegory for life. And they've written some beautiful stuff on the subject. And I think a lot of that's true, but at the same time, a lot of that misses the forest for the trees, because you don't do something unless it's fun or enjoyable, right? You don't spend all this time to go do something unless you're enjoying it. And part of the enjoyment factor is catching the fish. So when I say it's not about the fish, for me, that's not the only goal that I go to the river with. It's not a complete bust for me if I get skunked, or if I only catch small fish, or if I only catch one fish. Sometimes, and Alex can attest to this very well, it's very frustrating when I only catch dinks. Sometimes I do get very frustrated for it, but I have to remind myself, step back, remind myself what I'm actually there for. For me, it's the whole process of going fishing that I enjoy. It's not just the fish. It's the time on the water, the drive to get there, hiking around, problem solving my way through the tough days, matching the hatches. All of that combines to make this experience that I enjoy, that I get a lot of fulfillment out of. And so I'm very excited to go do that as often as I possibly can. And again, the fish are a huge part of that, but they're not the focal point. Just to give you an example, I've had a pretty rough couple of weeks personally. Been a lot of crap going on. And I went out fishing with Alex and his brother Berkeley last week because I needed some time on the water. And we hit this river. It's really never been great to me. Alex and Berkeley have had wonderful days there. I've just never really connected with this river, but it's a great spot. I have nothing against it. Just never shown off its colors for me. I caught 3 fish in like 6 hours. So kind of a slow day. I think Alex caught 5 or 6. It was a little slow for him too. Berkeley killed it on streamers though. He caught a whole bunch. But even though the fishing was really slow, just the act of getting out, of being there in the river, there's nobody else around. We went on a Thursday. There's nobody on the water. We had it all to ourselves. We saw a bunch of elk on the way out. Just we're out in the world, out in nature. Just that act of getting out was more than enough to help me shake my funk and sort things out a little bit, and move through the tough stuff that I've been dealing with. So in all honesty and in all seriousness, I have experiences like that. They're amazing. They're transformative for me. They've made me a better person. They've given me so many incredible opportunities and experiences. The motivation behind what we're doing here at VFC is to help people have experiences like that, to help them live real life. It's not just a catchy slogan. It's actually what we believe in here. That's why we're doing everything that we're doing. I mean, last I saw, there's something like 8 million people in America who fly fish. And of those 8 million who fly fish, and that's like they've gone at least once a year, they're counted in that number. There's probably 1 million that are hardcore, or they're fishing over 50 days a year. So this is a tiny niche we're in, even though it doesn't feel that way geographically. There's not very many of us out there. But again, you figure maybe 1 million people a year who are out there often enough to experience what it's like to catch a rising trout on a dry fly during a hatch, or strip set into a huge streamer, or toss these weird leeches to carp. It's not an experience very many people get to have. They're amazing. They've enriched my life without a doubt. And I know that they'll do the same for anybody else who tries it. And I honestly reckon the world could use a little bit of enrichment right now. So you asked about the motivation, that's where it is. The opportunity to get up and do something I love every day is fantastic as well. Working with VFC beats the absolute pants off of any other job I've ever had. So there's a lot that goes into it that's enjoyable. So hopefully that answers that part of your question. But your second part of your question was about guides. If you're looking at guide packages that run $5,000, you're completely out of my price range too. I can't afford that. Good float trip in the West is about $700 a day anymore. I don't know what it is back east because I don't float out east, but your walk and wade trips can be a little bit cheaper than that, but they're usually in that same ballpark, $600-700 a day. And you should expect to pay that for a good guide. There are exceptions to that, but generally you're going to pay up for a good guide. What I mean by a good guide is someone who actually is going to take the time to give you the experience that you want. And the best way to figure out if a guide's good at all is honestly to ask questions. Hop on Facebook, ask for recommendations in some local fishing groups, talk to other anglers, read the reviews. That's a huge one. Good guides are going to be booked up years in advance, but good guides also tend to work for good outfitters who also have other good guides. They may just be a little bit younger, maybe not as well known, but they're still going to be good guides. They've got to carry on that outfitter's reputation. So any outfitter running a decent business is not going to hire a bad guide. Every guide might have a bad day, but that does not make them a bad guide. But reading reviews of both the guide and the outfitter in general is a great way to make sure you're spending money with someone who can help you do what you want. And it's also important that when you're booking a guide specifically for the purposes of learning, that you tell the outfitter that's the whole goal of your trip. Because some guides are awful teachers. I've fished with some guides who are just not good teachers. They're great at rowing and they're great at putting you on fish. Not so good at the teaching part of it. There's other guides out there who don't want to teach at all. They might be good. They just don't want to. They just want you to lob nymph rigs all day because it's easier than anything else. And they just want to put as many fish in the boat as they can. Thankfully, those guides are few and far between as well. You've got a very good chance of getting a good guide, but you do need to communicate what you're expecting because the outfitters know that too. They know that they've got some guides who just excel with experienced anglers. They've got other guides who are great with new anglers. So communicate that. Tell them that's what you're looking for, that you really want a teacher. You'd like to catch some fish, but you really want to just get more skills, hone what you already have so you can become better. And they'll usually be able to hook you up with the right guide for that situation. So hopefully that answers your questions. Appreciate it. Thanks a bunch. Clarence from Canada has our next question, writes in and says, I have been fly fishing for 5 years, enjoy tying my own flies, and have now ventured into building George Harvey type slack leaders using Maxima chameleon for small streams, all in pursuit of our native cutthroat trout here in southwest Alberta. Having a challenge with the blood knot. Can I substitute an Orvis tippet knot or double uni to build these leaders, or do I need to grit my teeth and keep working on the blood knot? Really enjoy all your content. Thanks for all you do for us anglers. Clarence, thanks for the question. I appreciate it, and the kind words as well. Thank you. For those who don't know, George Harvey type slack leader, it's just a recipe for how you can tie a leader. They're very popular with dry flies because you can build up a leader that presents the fly with a little bit more grace. There's a little bit more slack in the leader, so you've got a bit more opportunity for drag-free drift. So that's what this type of leader is. It's a specific leader formula, and then Maxima chameleon is just the brand name of the material that you're using to tie those leaders. Now, when you're tying these leaders up, blood knots are definitely the go-to because they're strong and they're also very slim. The slimmer the knot, the less drag that you will get from that knot on the water, gives you a better presentation. And then the slimmer knots also have a much smaller chance of getting hung up on your line guides during casting, because that is one downside to these kinds of leaders, that all those knots can get stuck on stuff. I go with blood knots over everything else because they are so slim and strong. The Orvis tippet knot's pretty bulky. I wouldn't use that for a leader knot. The double uni knot's actually pretty similar when you look at it to the blood knot. But I actually think the double uni is harder to tie than the blood knot. Granted, I learned the blood knot first, so that might make me a little predisposed that way. But I would just stick with it. The blood knot, it's what is prescribed by all these folks who knew way more than I do about building leaders. They say to use the blood knot, just grit your teeth, get through it. It'll serve you well in a ton of other fishing applications too. I'd just go with the blood knot if you can. But as far as tying leaders in general goes, I know some folks love it. Some folks would really like to get into the weeds with this, but my 2 cents is that I think there's just more work than they're worth. There's a lot that goes into it. I have not found that they cast significantly better in my experience. I have not seen that huge dramatic change in performance that people have told me I would. Now, I'm not saying that you haven't experienced that, but that's just my 2 cents on it. I also think that having a leader with no knots in it is 1,000% worth the cost of tapered leaders, because it floats a little bit better, doesn't get hung up in your guides, and then if there's junk in the water, it's going to hang up on it less if there's no knots to catch that. So that's just my 2 cents on leaders. I've done a show about that before in the past. You can dig that up if you want any more of my information. But if you're going to build your leaders, use that blood knot. Definitely worth learning. So thanks for the question. Leo from Arkansas has our next question, writes in and says, "Hi, first off, I just want to say I absolutely love the channel and your podcast. I've learned so much more about flies and just fly fishing in general. In regards to my question, I was wanting to know what the difference is between jig nymphs and regular nymph beadheads. I usually just fish on an indicator setup and have heard mixed reviews about which is better on this setup. Again, love the channel and keep up the awesome work. Tight lines." Leo, great question, and thank you for the kind words. I appreciate it. So jigged nymphs, we also refer to these as Euro nymphs. You can hear that they're interchangeable, and Euro nymphs are also kind of a certain style where they're very slim. They don't have a lot of stuff dangling off them so that they sink a little bit faster, but as a rule, your Euro nymphs also tend to be tied on these jig hooks. So we can really use these terms interchangeably. But the big difference between a jigged nymph and a regular nymph is that the jigged nymph will ride with the hook point up in the water instead of down. So the theory is that you're going to hang up a lot less on the rocks and branches and other junk that's on the river bottom. A standard nymph, again, that's going to ride hook point down, so the hook point's pointing towards the bottom of the river, and the thought process is you get hung up with those more. Anecdotally, I can tell you that since I made the switch to jigged nymphs, I do snag up less with those than I do with a standard nymph rig. So I think that part of it does hold out in my experience, but it's really hard to quantify that as well. So I don't know that I put a ton of stock in that being 100% true, but it is true for me. So that's one part of it. Sorry, I just lost my place in my notes here. I also haven't heard people saying that you shouldn't use jigged nymphs on an indicator rig. So that's a new one for me. I honestly haven't heard someone come at you for that before. We use jig nymphs on bobber rigs all the time here at VFC. Shoot, Alex and I did just last week. We caught fish on them. They work great. What I really like about jig nymphs and why I encourage folks to fish them over the regular ones is that since the shape of the hook is different, it's going to push all that weight forward. So again, it is going to make that fly ride hook point up like I mentioned, but it also makes the fly bounce and flutter through the water more. I think it gives it a little bit more of a lifelike appearance than the standard nymph, which tends to just kind of drift and not really have any movement to it. I think these jig nymphs get a little bit more lifelike movement. I have no idea if that makes any difference, if the fish notice or if they even care, but I feel like it does. And you're a lot more likely to fish a fly well when you're confident in it. So you can take the wins where you can get them. But those are the main differences. I tie most of my nymphs now on jigged hooks, and I'm really happy with the results over the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years since I made the switch over to them. So don't worry about fishing them on a bobber rig. They will be just fine. I appreciate the question. And with that, folks, we are going to move on to the live real life moment for this week's show. Every week, we end the show by sharing stories and pictures from folks out there in the VFC audience who are living real life. We love to get the opportunity to hear from you, see what you're doing, and see your successes out on the water. So if you've got a live real life moment that you would like to share with us, you can send those in. There's a link to do it in the show notes, or right here on the screen, there's a QR code if you're watching the video podcast. And this week's live real life moment comes to us from Wendell. Writes in and says, "Hey guys, I've been an avid listener of your podcast for a few months and have been learning lots. The other day I went out and decided to go fishing, obviously, and the fish were popping off at the hole I was at. Whitefish were eating tons of tiny little bugs on top of the water, and I could see quite a few brown trout swimming about. I noticed that all the brown trout were hanging out in the bottom of the pool, so I tied on a streamer. I had little interest in it, but did see some bigger fish give chase. I decided to change it up and tied on some nymphs, and one cast later, I caught my PB brownie. I was absolutely thrilled, and it's all thanks to your podcast and all the knowledge you guys have been sharing." Wendell, that's awesome. Congrats on the new personal best fish. Good job. Really cool little story, and that really drives home the value of watching and waiting, right? You really do. You gain so much information when you pay attention to what their fish are doing. You don't just try and fish a certain way. You base your fishing on what the fish are doing. And then when you're able to do that, just like Wendell experienced, that's when the magic happens. So great story, Wendell. Appreciate it. And with that, folks, we're going to wrap the show up this week. Thank you so much for being here with us. We appreciate it. It means more than you know when you watch the whole show or listen to the whole show. If you haven't already, please take a moment to rate and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening to it. The more ratings and subscriptions we get, the more folks we can help live real life, which is the whole goal of VFC. And speaking of fishing and VFC, go spend some time on the water this week. I know runoff's happening, but go find some lakes, go find some fish, go practice your casting at the very least. Have some fun, and until next week, live real life.